Welcome to Talking with Tech. My name is Chris Bouguet, and I'm here with Rachel Madel. What's going on, Rachel?
Not much, Chris. Super excited to talk all about GIFs.
I love GIFs. What are you giving me?
Oh, you're so funny with the dad jokes. First of all, I feel like you and I just like on a personal level love sending gifts to each other. It's just like part of our like normal interactions. We're just like sending really funny gifts. So I feel like this episode is especially important to us because we're such big gift sharers.
Don't you think that GIFs, like when we send GIFs back and forth to each other, is like a form of AAC? Like when we're not using verbal speech, we're just using images to convey our messages and our feelings and our thoughts, right? And so I always think of it like this. It's like AAC.
I love it, and it's also really, if you think about it, broader level too, with the students that we work with. It's also like you have to have some like perspective taking to figure out like what GIF makes sense paired with, a text or something like that. So it's definitely an idea that you can use to work with older students. Oh, you're trying to tell him, you're excited for the party. What GIF do you think we could send that would communicate that? Or like, oh, I think he might be annoyed right now because his car, needs to be fixed again. What GIF do you think you could send in this situation? So I feel like it's really good for something functional. And, we all are communicating with GIFs with our friends and through texting. So it feels like a really functional therapy idea.
So I think something that happens sometimes with students when they're writing, let's say they're like any student might be is like typing something, and all of a sudden they get the little red squiggly underneath, and they go, "Oh, I spelled it wrong." So they right click and spell check comes up, and they choose the first word that's in spell check, and that's something you can't do when you're looking for pictures. Like when you're looking for the GIF and you're sending a text message, you don't want to just pick the first thing. Maybe you do, but there's some sort of selection process that goes through like what is the perfect image that explains what will either make the other person laugh or convey how I'm feeling. Sometimes it's the first one, but sometimes you gotta like do a little bit of looking to find out. And there's a process that I know my brain goes through to try and figure out what is the right choice, what's going to be the perfect thing to send.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And it's an interesting process to go through. Like we do it naturally, we're just like surfing, like, let me see, this one looks perfect. But I'm always trying to find the perfect gift. I'm like, no, like I'm going to keep searching and see if there's one that's a little bit better, a little bit closer to what I'm trying to convey, or a little bit funnier. I also think it's like a way to express humor. And I think that these are all skills that we can help our students work on.
Do you have any now this may be as a side note, but I don't know. Do you have any like go-to GIFs that are sort of like gestalts, like that we use all the time, for instance, like ones that just, that jump out at you like, yeah, Chris, as a matter of fact, there's one that I just kind of use all the time.
That's a great question. There's a few, I feel like. There's one with like Oprah holding her hands out. You know what I'm talking about?
For sure, of course. And you get a.
Yeah, exactly. So that one I use a lot. There's also, have you seen the Elmo one where everything's on fire? Like
everything's on fire. Yes.
I like that one too. I'm trying to think if there's any other ones.
Our family does. Our family has one. It's the old lady from Titanic, and underneath it says, "It's been 84 years." Like whenever we're waiting, Melissa's picking up food. When's it coming? It's been 84 years. Tucker, you coming down for dinner? It's been 84 years. Have you taken the garbage out? It's been 84 years. Like anytime there's some sort of waiting or longing, it's been 84 years.
I love that. That's a good one. I'm going to put that in my Rolodex of gifts because I feel like that's a really poignant one. It's like a really fun thing to do. And it also like, I oftentimes will add them when I'm doing Instagram stories, for example. I'm like always trying to think like, how can I add like a really fun GIF to this situation? And again, it's all stuff we can incorporate with the work that we do with students. Like, let's make it functional and fun, and GIFs definitely make it fun.
Yeah, it's certainly a 21st century skill to know how to communicate this way and to know how to communicate effectively this way, right? It certainly falls under the realm of communication, right? It's just a new way to communicate.
Yeah. Another thing I think it can be really powerful is when you're working with students on literacy. So a lot of times I'll incorporate GIFs into the literacy work that I'm doing instead of finding a static image, which is fine. But I like the animation of GIFs. And I think that especially for our students who are just emerging with, literacy skills and even language skills, being able to work on verbs in that way, I think is really fun and motivating. And I'm constantly helping my kids, pick whatever GIF they want for like an independent writing exercise and then build it, like make me a sentence, whether that's typing or writing, whatever that looks like for that particular student. But I think it's a great way to work on literacy. Kris, we always get people who are saying, they're not motivated by anything. Or I can't get them to engage with anything. And so for those students who you feel like are really hard to engage, the first question I ask any family that I start working with is like, what is your student motivated to do on their own? Like, what are they doing when no one's telling them what to do? That's the first question I ask. And it's typically like, oh, well, they love Paw Patrol, or they love this specific YouTube video, or they love letters, or, fill in the blank. 9 times out of 10, I can go to Giphy.com, which is where I tend to get my GIFs from. And I search whatever it is the student's interested in and collect a handful of GIFs to then pull up and see if I can elicit some type of language and communication. Kids are really motivated by this. And also, you can find so many GIFs. Like before we started recording, Kris, I was on a session. This student is obsessed with Peppa Pig. And we've been doing Peppa Pig GIFs, I feel like for almost a year, which sounds kind of crazy, but it feels like they're never ending. It also feels like there's so many different targets. At first we were working on verbs because the student was working on verbs. Now we're working on pronouns and we're working on, he, she, and they. And it's just like there's so many things to do. And every time I pull them up, he gets so excited. And I even ask him, I'm like, do you want to do something different? And he's like, no. He wants Peppa Pig GIFs. And sometimes I'll throw in a real photograph of a pig. It'll be a GIF, but it'll be a photograph of a pig, not Peppa. And no dice. He's he looks at me like, are you crazy? And I'm like, listen, man, I'm just trying to expand your horizons. But he just loves Peppa Pig GIFs. So it's just why not use what he's really motivated by? And he is doing amazing. It started off a year ago. He was just saying, the single verb, which was progress because he would just typically say Peppa. He would start by saying Peppa and he would start and end by saying Peppa. And then it was we transitioned to some verbs. And he got really good with the verbs, but then he was omitting the subject. So I was working on, Peppa is eating, Peppa is swimming, Peppa is jumping. And he's now finally doing that. And now we're transitioning to the pronoun. She is jumping. And now we have George too. So he is doing things and they're together. They are. So it's just so interesting how this has transpired. And it's not just this student. I do GIFs with a lot of students that I work with because they're so motivating and so interesting and usually so novel too, that it just makes it a perfect therapy idea.
Something that you said there that I think is especially wise is that you curated them. So you didn't go to Giphy.com with the student and then do a search. You went and you found some that you knew were appropriate, put them in a place I'm guessing a Google Drive or something, or put them in Google Slides or something like that, and then showed them to the student. Because I know from experience that Giphy.com might have stuff that it'd be questionable to show to a student. Is that fair?
Yes. Absolutely. Happy you brought that up. Giphy.com is sometimes inappropriate, so you definitely don't want to be searching on there in real time with a student. When I'm seeing kids virtually, I'll pause my share. So I'll pause the screen share, I use Zoom, and that's a way that I can search quickly, scroll, make it big, and then reshare my screen. But yeah, you're definitely going to want to curate this. The other thing is I started this massive shared iPhoto album with my entire team. And whenever we find good GIFs, we'll just upload it to this shared iPhoto album. So I have a whole iPhoto album that I can also pull up. We also have a resource on my shop. We have 2 different resources, which are huge Google slide decks with those GIFs. And I have to tell you, it's a little behind the scenes, Kris. It's one of the most frustrating resources I've ever created because the GIFs don't always animate. And there's no way to know when a GIF is going to animate or not. And it's like if we have 100 GIFs in those resources, we probably had to go through like 400 GIFs to get there. So this is a shout out to my team who is so amazing and helps me put together these resources. I just felt so bad because they were like, and that one doesn't animate, and that one doesn't animate. So anyway, that is one caveat. Sometimes they don't animate, which just means they're like this kind of low grade quality static image, which you definitely aren't going to want to use. You want them to animate. That's the whole point. But yeah, that resource is already available on my store, and I use it all the time, honestly, just because GIFs are so motivating.
So where on your store? What's it called?
It's just, you can search, if you go to rachelmadel.com/shop, you'll see it's like GIFs with commenting, GIFs. There's an emoji one where you can like have a reaction to the GIF. I use them all the time. And so I was like, I'm always thinking about when I create resources, like, what do I want? What do I want to use in my therapy? And then that's kind of how my resources are born. So I use all the resources that we make because it started off as an idea for one of my clients or a few of my clients. And I was just like, well, we might as well create a resource out of this so more people can benefit, which is really great. So yeah, go to rachelmadel.com/shop and you'll see the GIF resources.
So one of the reasons we're talking about GIFs today is because the interview that's coming up is with Dr. Kris Brock, who talks about, or you'll hear in the interview, us talk a little bit about GIFs, but mostly about animated symbols and some of the research that he's done around animated symbols and using pictures in general. And then, he and I got into it, and it was so in depth that we ended up deciding to have to cut this one into two as well. I know we've had a lot of two-part episodes recently, but there's just a lot of good stuff. We can't fit it all into one episode. So without further ado, here's my interview with Dr. Kris Brock.
Are you enjoying this episode? We would love for you to take a few minutes to hit the subscribe button so you always know when we release new content. Even better, if you leave us a review on iTunes, then more people will find this podcast and learn about AAC. We also love reading your reviews on air. Thank you so much for your support. We love this community. Now we can head back into the episode.
Welcome to the Talking with Tech podcast. My name is Chris Bouguet, and I'm here with Dr. Kris Brock. Chris, am I saying that right? Am I saying your last name right?
Yes, you are, sir. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here. So real quick history here is that you are a professor that works with Michaela, and Michaela is our audio engineer that hooked us up. And she was saying you're doing some really interesting research in the area of AAC. So I was like, well, yeah, let's talk about it. So that's my understanding, but we've not met before. So tell me and the audience that's listening who you are and what you do.
So my name is Dr. Kris Brock. I'm an assistant professor at Idaho State University. I'm on the Meridian campus, and I'm also the president-elect of ISHA.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. Okay, excellent. Idaho is like one of my favorite places to go. I've been driven all over Idaho. I didn't realize for some reason I was thinking you were probably in Utah, but I guess that's because that's where Michaela lives. But okay, cool.
Yeah.
So how did you first get interested in AAC?
Well, it's kind of a happy and sad story, kind of all wrapped up into one. I've been volunteering, in speech therapy clinics, like primarily Scottish Rite when I was in California since in high school. Okay. And so I've known for a very young age that that's kind of where I wanted to go. And so during my master's training, I got the opportunity to work in a school for the severe to profound individual population. So a lot of kids with a lot of mixed disabilities and syndromes that, frankly, people have never heard of. So it's a really good experience and challenging in that, I had a lot of kids with complex communication needs on the caseload. And so I show up and they didn't have a speech therapist there for the year for whatever reason, right? A lot of turnover, obviously. And the vice principal had just moved up and she was a speech therapist. And so she was supervising me. And I was reading through some of these notes and a lot of these kids, and they were supposed to be seen once or two times a week for, 30 minutes is the most frequent in the school setting. And then I kept going back and I'm like, okay, well, where are these notes? Where's the data on these goals? And there was none, absolutely nothing. And I was shocked, and it come to learn that, the previous therapist was saying, oh, well, the special education teacher's better equipped to handle some of those AAC needs when compared to me. So, I'll pop in once at the beginning of the year and then once at the end of the year, and this is secondhand information from the special education teacher. And I'm like, gosh, I can't do that. I absolutely cannot do that to these kids. Like they're depending on me for just the simplest of communicative functions from requesting. Right. And obviously I have a soapbox about requesting, but it's like I have to do more for these kids and give them more diverse kind of language. And so that was kind of my goal. And we were using AAC in the classrooms during the teachers, lesson plans. And that's just kind of what got me into it. I think I created a lunch book, and I actually took all of these kids and we cooked lunch, for the entire class. Now, it was the saltiest chicken I've ever tasted in my life, but they mixed all of the ingredients, put all the chicken together, supervised with an electric grill, and we cooked, and it was just fun. And we had that communication book there along with their core boards, like ready to go. And so it kind of got me wondering, like, well, why do people fear AAC? Like, what's the fear? It's language intervention with some pictures. Mm-hmm. And that's always how I've approached it.
So something interesting that struck me there in that story that you were telling is that you did say you used core boards. And I'm curious there because I think a lot of people start, maybe not today, but I know like when I first started, core vocabulary was sort of a new concept. It was a lot of noun-based stuff, boards. And so, but you had heard about core vocabulary and were attempting to implement it.
Right. Yeah. So this was, 2007, 2008, right in there. And so we had core vocabulary because obviously there's benefits to it. But again, those are high frequency words, and high frequency words don't really portray or don't lend themselves well to a graphic symbol interpretation, right? So like the symbol go, like you have to directly teach that. Well, the nice thing is like I took a note out of Dr. Kathy Binger's book, and I was like, well, I can't just have core because technically those are abstract. They are frequently occurring. I get the benefits, but I need to teach core through fringe. And so, what do these kids want to do? Well, they wanted to cook, and that was like everyday language in their classroom. So we used some of that fringe pieces that the teachers are trying to incorporate, and then I'm pairing it with the core vocabulary, which is something I think that gets lost. When I speak with clinicians or I'm speaking with students and they're saying like, oh, I just got to use core. And I'm like, well, fringe motivates the use of core, right? If it's not motivating, you're dead in the water, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of success.
Yeah, so I couldn't agree more. That's exactly what we talk about on the podcast all the time. Rachel says the same thing with the other podcast host. And it's what we talk about is the golden rule of like 80-20, right? So if typical speech is 80% core words and 20% fringe, then maybe that is sort of something we could use as a way to as a marker or a milestone for how we do the intervention, right? And so right. And so and like you said, the fringe vocabulary is often much more motivating. So we'll talk about this concept of key vocabulary. So pick vocabulary words that are really key or really important to the person. Mm-hmm. Rachel calls it personal core, right? It's not really core vocabulary, but it's a personal fringe word that's important to me. I noticed back there the analogy I always use is your family pet, your dog, right? Yeah, I saw you had two dogs back there behind you. And it's like, so that would be a fringe vocabulary word, your dog's name, that you might be really important to practice and teach, but you can't just teach that fringe vocabulary. You got to teach all the core that surrounds it, like come and eat and go and stop and play and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. All right, cool. So when so that's how you sort of got interested, and now you're a university professor that teaches this stuff at the university level. Is that accurate?
Yeah. So I'm actually getting ready to teach the AAC course in the spring here. So I got a couple little tricks up my sleeve for the students. I need to revamp some of the course work a little bit. And I'm really excited that we actually have that course, and it's a dedicated AAC course.
Yeah, I think that's something that has grown over the years, but we're still struggling as a country, as a world, to have AAC built into pre-graduate study programs. So it's awesome to hear that you're doing that. Now, something else you touched on was that concept of iconicity, right? Like that certain words, like core vocabulary words, are often harder to depict pictorially than a fringe vocabulary word. So dog is a little easier to do than, say, the word work, right? How do you draw work, right? And that seems to be something you're interested in. If I understand what Michaela was hooking us up to talk about, this is it, right? Is that you have done some work in the area of iconicity?
Yeah. So iconicity, for listeners that maybe need a refresher, maybe they don't, but iconicity is a spectrum, right? I understand it. You as the SLP, you don't have to teach it. It's just right there. And then on the opposite end, you have opaque words. And so you think of an opaque word as like think, right? It's very abstract. You have to really spend some time teaching that symbol-referent relationship. And so what I'm saying is, well, teaching takes time, a lot of time, especially with the populations that we're serving. How can we make it simpler so that you as the clinician don't have to spend time teaching semantics? Because that's probably my second soapbox, is everybody has a semantic goal. But what are you teaching with semantics? And oftentimes with people with high caseloads, we're saying like, okay, well, they have the SLPA out there, and the SLP is teaching the goal, and they're saying, okay, find work, find go, and they're navigating that way. I'm like, well, that's not really intervention necessarily, and it's too heavy on where our things are placed.
Yeah, and not how you use them.
Right. And so it's like, well, how do you use, think and go and play in the appropriate context? And so what, I've been working on since my PhD at Texas Tech with Dr. Raj Cole is animated graphic symbols. And so we've been looking at verbs and prepositions. And how can we make those more iconic so that the symbol-referent relationship means it's so apparent that no one has to teach it? Right? Because if I don't have to teach semantics, that means I get to spend more time teaching syntax, use, right? So syntax and social competence, which is really just the key to a lot of these kids. Like, get them to use these symbols in a functional, meaningful way. And once you got that, the rest, I would argue, would come much easier.
All right, so let's dig into this concept of animated symbols, because this is something that I've been thinking about for over 20 years too. When I first started as a speech language pathologist, the big message we had in our school district was symbols, right? We were going to wear lanyards. We're going to put symbols around our neck. We're going to teach people what these symbols mean. And I had this idea, again, 20 years ago, this was going to be my $1 million idea, right? I'm going to go to Super Duper or some company, and I'm going to make lenticular cards. So that word lenticular is like, if you picture the little cards that have the ridges on them, and you can for people who are listening, like, and you can move that card back and forth, and it shows this moving image. So in and out, right? Is you in and out, and you could wiggle the card, and you'd change from in to out, and you'd see it move. I never actually, went forth and made those cards. Is that what you're talking about? Like animating something like that? Or are you thinking, well, yeah, Kris, that was 20 years ago. Now I'm thinking digital, animated, like animated GIFs sort of thing. So what are you thinking when you say animated symbols?
Yeah, so I'm meaning an animated graphic cartoon line drawing. And so we're more in the digital realm now because of the computer processing capabilities, right? It's easy to upload these things to the systems and not overload the entire system. So we've developed, I shouldn't say we, I wasn't part of that, but my colleagues at Boston Children's Hospital have developed the Autism Language Program symbol set. And another commercially available animated graphic symbol set would be picture communication symbols. I think they're like $400 or $500 for the set. So there's two sets that we use most often. Now, I guess within the umbrella, and I don't think AAC has really gotten into classifying animated symbols, in much detail. So we're just going to kind of, like the GIFs and video shots, YouTube, technically there's animation on YouTube, right? But we're only going to be talking about the graphic line drawings themselves. And so that's where, we have started to look into, okay, we know verbs aren't used as frequently, by children with complex communication needs. We know that research is focused on nouns heavily for the last 3 or 4 decades. Why? Well, probably one, because verbs, you have to have that movement, right? Like with your cards, right? You're showing that movement of in and out. And that's exactly what our verb and preposition symbols are doing, right? We will open the door, our little character will walk into the house, right? And that's in. Same thing, out, he's just in reverse. And what's really nice about it is, animation has 4 kind of main purposes. And the one that there's a couple that we're trying to really hone in on is, one, we want to attract the kid's attention, or the adult in the case of persons with aphasia, right? And we want to really convey information about a process, so from beginning to end. And then, the third one is portray completion of a procedure. So for example, if we're going to teach how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, we're going to use video modeling, and that's another form of animation, I would argue, right? Because you're showing that movement over time. And it's really important that verbs get that movement because, well, one, what would you do if you didn't have that symbol movement? Well, you'd probably get up and start doing it yourself, right? You'd jump, or you'd run, or you'd open and close the door. So now we're just going to say, well, if animation is going to work, let's make it a tool. And what really is beneficial is if we can get AAC companies to say, okay, I need to be able to flip on and off that animation. The child, the communicator, needs to be able to do that, to self-cue if they need it.
That sounds awesome. So years ago, I think Tobii Dynavox had something like this. I mean, I remember seeing a mock-up. I've never actually seen it in use, but I remember seeing a mock-up of a core vocabulary screen with the verbs that were animated. Well, actually, all the core vocabulary, so it wasn't specific to verbs, but like you said, the prepositions. And I don't speak for Tobii Dynavox. This is what I remember a rep said years and years and years ago when they were showing us, is that it looked visually overwhelming because first you have just if you have a large grid size, that can look overwhelming. We now know that we're going to teach it anyway, right? Yep. But then if things are starting to move all over the place in these little cells, it's now even like, whoa, what am I looking at here? There's all these sorts of things. So what I'm hearing you advocate for is the idea of being able to turn it on or off per cell. Does that sound fair? Is that what you're saying?
Right. Yeah, that's a critique that I just recently got from the ASHA Convention Committee on AAC. They're like, well, that would be so overwhelming if they were all animated. I'm like, yeah, you're right. We'd probably overload working memory and they wouldn't be able to use it and they would abandon it. So we have to think of animation strictly as a tool at this point until research proves us otherwise or confirms what we suspect. So using animation as a tool, and if the child can't or the adult can't turn it on, well, you, the clinician, can turn it on, and you can cycle through verbs and prepositions. So the one thing that I hear a lot of clinicians doing is like, oh, we have a core word of the week. And I'm like, well, why not like 10 core words of the week so that we can combine those words with other words? So that's the kind of the approach that I'm advocating for in a lot of our publications. We're saying, you pick 10, right? Or 5 or 10, whatever you think your child can handle. You turn them on and you cycle through each week, every couple of weeks, you cycle through and you turn off animations and then turn them on, depending on how they do, whether they've reached mastery or maybe they still need the assistance of the animation tool. And then you just move on and you pick 5 more verbs and prepositions to animate.
So let me ask you just a clarifying question there. So there's one dynamic where they're on the actual screen of the AAC tool, but then I also heard you sort of talk about teaching those. So am I understanding correctly? Like, let's say there was a static symbol in a video, and the static symbol is like in the top right-hand corner of the video, and now we're going to teach the what that static symbol means by showing you animated graphics. Is that similar? Or like we're going to teach it or not really? You're talking about, no, I want to teach it, but I want to teach the animated symbol.
I'm going to teach the animated symbol first because I think in terms of working memory resources, and all of the benefits that we know about animation, that the animation itself will teach the verb or preposition for you a lot of the times, is what we're kind of seeing. So Fujisawa et al. In 2011 did a study where, they split kids up, they had intellectual impairment, and they said, okay, this group's all going to get only static. So they were shown a static verb and they got it wrong. They got another chance. So they were shown the static verb again. And in the experimental condition, shown the static, and when they got it wrong, they were shown the animated. And what ends up happening is the animation, like, oh yeah, that's jump. I know that. Right, so it's that motion perception system. We're attracting the attention of the learner to a very specific movement. We show the entire procedure being completed, and then it just clicks. Like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
So often when I heard the exact same thing, and we talk about the same thing. Is we started off with when we were first introducing core vocabulary to teachers. Pick a core word of the week. We'll start there because it's new to you. And then now, why does it need to be one? And in fact, does it need to be core word, or is it core word plus the morphemes that go with it? ING, and right. So we're going to expand, right? But one of the things we also told them is, it doesn't make sense in often cases to teach one core word, because there's a second core word that often is a natural pair. If I'm going to teach up, I might as well teach down, right? Mm-hmm. And when it comes to animated symbols, how do you wrestle with that? Meaning that in and out example, right? In a traditional AAC system, you have two spots. You have an in button and an out button, right? But in this, it would be transitioning from in to out. It would be one hit, one cell. Does that make sense? Or like stop go would be the same thing. You wouldn't need two places. You'd only need one. And then how would you know which word you're actually trying to say?
Right. So that's some very interesting problems that we've kind of encountered in our most recent study that we're hopefully going to submit to JSLHR here at the end of the year. And we did a study on receptive syntax. And so we put together subject, verb, object, prepositional phrase, symbol sequences. And we asked children to identify a corresponding photograph that matched the symbol sequence. And then we had them actually label the symbol sequence. We're like, okay, this is a secret code. Tell us what it says. And again, these are all children with typical development, right? Because proof of concept is needed before we even move into kids with complex communication needs. And what we're finding is those symbols that you're describing, the in, the out, the open, the close, when they loop, it's a problem. Because as you're reading the symbol sequence, by the time you get to the dog jumps, into the house, well, in is very specific. So it opens the door and the kid walks in. But then when it loops, the door opens and the kid is back out. So it looks like out. Mm-hmm. And then you get the same problem with open and close. And so those pairs are an issue. And one thing that we're noticing is, well, you have to kind of control them a little bit more. I think you could teach them separately. You can certainly turn on one animation for in. So we see in, but then the other kid is out of the house. And then you can teach it that way. Right. So I don't know if there's a definitive evidence-based answer on how to teach those kind of pairs, because it is difficult, and animation, I think, is being investigated since 2008, so it's still relatively young.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this sounds like the research that you're doing to try and figure this out, right? Not that, hey, we figured it out and this is what you do, right? It's still fledgling and it's still new. All right, cool. So tell me more about this research. So what have you found by trying to implement that, or I guess researching it? Yeah.
So when we're looking at the data, animation is hands down the best, right? In terms of being able to identify the corresponding photograph with your symbol sequence. And then also in terms of labeling, right? Correctly labeling the sequence. So we coded it as, you either labeled all 5 or you didn't, right? So it's a 0 or 1. And then we took the overall percentage of like, okay, how many symbols out of 5 did you name or label correctly? Right?
Gotcha. And let me just make sure I understand that for a second. So let's say I'm a child in your study, right? You have shown me 5 words, and I'm trying to guess what they are from a static image. And then you show me five words, and you've given me animation I get to guess. And I'm almost always going to be more accurate with the animation than the static.
I'm wondering if I have screen share capabilities.
Sure. It's an audio podcast, so
it's all completely audio. Well, it'll help me. I'm very visual myself here. And so in the identification task, right, what we have up on the screen here is a graphic symbol sequence, right? So it's Woody pulls the wagon over the rock. Now, obviously, this is the static condition, but if it was animated, we would see that our little character here, the verb pull, he would literally pull this all the way across the screen.
Gotcha.
So he's pulling a giant rock attached to a rope.
There are 5 symbols. The first one is Woody from Toy Story. The second one is a nondescript, so not a character from any sort of any recognizable character, with a rope pulling a large gray boulder type thing. The third is a wagon, like a static image of a little red wagon. The fourth is that same character on top of the boulder. And then the last one looks like either a lesson picks or board maker sort of symbol of a boulder. It's not the same boulder we've seen before. Is that fair?
Yeah. And so in this one, I think you made a common mistake that a lot of our kids make in terms of the preposition, because he's not technically on top of this rock. He's over it. Right. So these are the things that static graphic symbols really have a hard time differentiating, because what ends up happening here, our character, and he's called Ace, and this is the Autism Language Program symbol set from Boston Children's Hospital. He's over here to the left of this kind of little rock. And then what ends up happening is he floats over it, and we end up seeing the completion of a process. So he's never really on, or he never really hovers there. So in the static version, technically he's not touching, right? So it's supposed to be over. That's what we think animation can do for a lot of kids, because I want you to focus on the verb and the preposition. Because what happens when we do that? Well, we know that the verb is the heart of a sentence. Literally every other word maps onto a verb. So let's say, for example, the verb, give. Mom gives presents to the child. What ends up happening is the verb give activates a series of nouns that will give you something, right? Santa gives, mom, dad, right? Grandma, grandpa. All of those nouns get activated. Well, what is being given? More nouns. Wagon, presents, food. And
cold.
Yeah, they're cold. And so what we end up seeing is, well, if we can tap into this neural network and get all of those activations going, right, we can teach a series of nouns by only focusing on the verbs, right? So I like to tell my students, if you target the verbs, you get a lot of nouns for free just because of the context.
Yeah.
So stop teaching nouns and wasting your time. Teach more verbs. And then eventually, you're gonna have to teach certain nouns and things, because obviously English language is complex, and there's no way around it. But do I really want to teach wagon?
Right.
No, I don't want to teach that. Or I don't want to teach something more meaningful, impactful,
like pulls.
Mm-hmm.
All right, and so this is what I'm looking at here is one. So then, am I understanding the next thing you might show is 4 more of these, where there's a sequence of 5 images, and I'm supposed to sort of guess what the phrase might be with each one, and then you do it again with animated?
Yes. So we have the animated static conditions, and we have 4 photographs of Woody doing something with a wagon, and obviously there's only one correct photograph that kids need to point to. And so overall, what we found with these kids that were studied, 20 to 30% increase in successful identification when the verb and the preposition were animated.
Gotcha. So you're not actually animating all the symbols, right? It's not like the wheels on the wagon are rotating, because that's the noun. You're only animating the verbs.
Right. Yeah, we don't have to animate anything else, because again, if we kind of hold to this philosophy of, well, if I can focus and teach the verbs, the other stuff comes for free, right? We can see like, oh, okay, I see who's pulling. Woody's doing the pulling.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense to me. Do you have it? I would be very curious to see what the animations look like. I mean, how is it just the the same? Is it Ace pulling the rock and his legs are moving? Is it him leaping up over the rock, or is it like a series of 3 static? Well, I guess that's what animation is, right? It's like a little flip book. It's a bunch of static images strung together. So is that how you sort of animated it?
So that would be a really good question, because I was not privy to that implementation creation. That was Dr. Howard Shane and Dr. Ralph Schlosser out in Boston. And so based from what I have heard from them is that they had 5 kind of static images that they combined. And I think that's how they did it. So
gotcha. That's how they made the GIF. Gotcha. Again, like a little flip book. If we were doing this in a non-digital way, it'd be like, look at these images that I'm going to flip together, and you're going to see it's going to animate the Ace pulling the rock.
Right.
Cool. Okay. But so we see, what I'm hearing you say is that when we show students this, the animation, the ability to understand what the phrase is goes up.
Right. Significantly. It's, 20-30% difference. And in terms of labeling, so we had our second task was a labeling task where we asked these kids to, okay, we have a secret code for you, and I need you to decipher said secret code. And we only showed them, again, animated or static, verb, prepositions. And then we had these 5 symbol sequences. So what we have, for example, would be Bo Peep eats the apple on the chair. And we would ask kids like, okay, what does this sentence mean? And what we found was, again, significant differences in terms of being able to correctly label these symbols within the sequence.
I know. I wish you hadn't told me. I wanted to guess it.
Yeah.
I know. I can see the text down there at the bottom, but give me another one and I'll hide the text. I want to see.
There we go. Let's do this one.
I'm covering up the text at the bottom. So again, since this is a visual thing, let me describe it for the for the people listening. So the first one is clearly Buzz Lightyear. It's a picture of Buzz Lightyear. The second one is Ace pushing that rock this time. The third one looks like a bicycle. And then the fourth one is Ace standing in the door of that same, maybe a larger version of that boulder, but it's almost like that boulder has a door in it and he's standing inside it. And then the last one, it's a drawing of a house. So Buzz pushes the bike inside the house. How'd I do?
Got it. Nailed it.
All right. It's a fun game. I want to do these riddles. I like this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And the kids that were doing it, we're really into it because, again, it's like, oh, it's a secret code. I got to figure out what's going on. And so it really kind of helped us. But, you brought up this kind of gray boulder looking thing, and obviously it changes shape, right? And so we call it the amorphous blob. And basically it's supposed to depict very generally the concept or the context of the verb or the preposition. So in the case of the verb pull, or push, this amorphous blob turns into a rather large boulder, and we're pushing it across the screen. Or in the case of the preposition in, the blob gets a little bit bigger, looks kind of like a house, and you could see our character Ace inside the house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, cool. And then but if I'm hearing you correctly, if these were animated, I'd even have a better chance at getting it right. I mean, I got this one right because I was able to suss it out. But there might be ones that's a little bit more difficult, or a little bit for students might not get it as accurately as I did on that last one. Is that fair?
That is very fair, more than fair.
And then we animate it, and then we say, oh, well, that now clearly it's going out or in or something. Okay. Yeah. Okay, here you got another one. Okay, so yeah, I'm seeing the animated. So this is Buzz, and he's clearly pushing the rock, and now there's the bike, and now he's moving out of so he's pushing the bike out of the house. Is that right? And before, I would not necessarily have known that he was coming out. He would be standing by this boulder, right? Meaning the fourth image is clearly Ace moving from inside the boulder outside the boulder. Yeah, if it was a static image, I would not know what that word is. I would have been guessing by, near, beside, something like that. So my sentence could have been Buzz pushes the bike by the house. Buzz pushes the bike near the house. But by animating that symbol, I nail it. I shouldn't say nail it. There's still some ambiguity there. Because it could be like Buzz pushes the bike outside the house because it's leaving or exiting the house. It's something like that.
Right.
All right, cool. So this is one study you did. Then what else have you, because it sounded like you did another study.
Yeah, so we, in 2019, it was a couple years ago, we looked at the identification accuracy of graphic symbols, both in animated and static formats, in kids diagnosed with autism. And so what we ended up doing was we put 4 autism language program symbols in a PowerPoint. We had the animated condition in which all 4 verbs were animated and looping. And then we asked them, okay, find jump, find pull, find push. And what we ended up seeing was that these kids with autism who had like less than 50 intelligible words, according to the caregivers, that they were identifying animated verbs with 25% greater accuracy. And again, we're not teaching them anything. We confirm that, through the parents and through our own testing, that these kids had knowledge of these verbs, right? But to have a 25% increase in one condition over another, and for the clinician or the experimenter, us, to do nothing, right, is absolutely incredible. That's really encouraging from this, overworked, too many kids on my caseload. What do I do? How do I teach these complex word classes? I don't have time to prep. I'm like, well, here it is. Here's one little tiny aspect of your job. If I can make your job easier, right, I'm happy. And if you're doing, and you're teaching verbs, right, because we know that's the heart of the sentence, I'm so grateful that you're doing that.
So this sounds exactly like an implementation strategy Rachel and I talk about in some of our presentations that we do, that we've talked about before. So there's a website called Giphy, and there's lots of different ones, but Giphy seems to be the most popular, where you can go into Giphy and you can pull up animated GIFs. And so the strategy we talk about is type in a core vocabulary word or whatever words you're targeting you want to teach, put it in there, and you're going to see animations that go along with what that word is, and then you can pull those out and you can put them in a safe spot so that you're not just searching Giphy, because there's some stuff in there that would probably not be appropriate for students to see in some cases. Right. But pull them out and put them into PowerPoint, Google Slides, something like that. So you had to do exactly what you just talked about. And you're learning like of the word turn. Here's all these different ways of looking at what turn is, and you're seeing these animated GIFs of the word turn. Is sort of what you're getting at, but what I'm hearing that's slightly different is you're talking about animated symbols of what turn is, not just sort of random GIFs on the internet.
Right. Yeah. So more specificity in terms of this is the graphic symbol that we're going to use. Now, I don't know if there's any research out there suggesting that the symbols, like what we're using, the graphic symbols versus a GIF is better, right? I will say this though, because I do remember speaking to some colleagues and into some SLPs, and they're saying, well, like, oh yeah, I use Giphy and that's how we teach. And I'm like, well, that's great. Like the animation is so powerful, but what is the purpose of your animation? Right? And I would argue that YouTube and Giphy, entertainment value first. Mm-hmm. And that's not a purpose of animation. So when I'm talking about animated symbols and that entertainment value, that's important. It's motivating. I get it. But Giphy is so fast. To see turn occur, right? It's usually because it's funny, because we love watching car crashes and we love seeing people avoid those car crashes, right? We're entertained, and so everything happens so quickly. What is happening to the working memory system of the child that you're interacting with? How do you know that they're understanding it? And obviously you can confirm and continue to use Giphy if it's working, great. But I'm a researcher, and so I want to know, well, which one's better? Right. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm not saying don't use Giphy, right? Definitely use it, but you have to monitor it, because the faster the animation, we call it like a shallow understanding. that we kind of look at it, we passively engage with the animation, and we say, oh yeah, I understand that. But then when it comes time to actually use the word turn, can you do it?
Yeah.
Right. So there's a difference between, that shallow understanding and then having an ALP symbol here, move very slowly, multiple pushes of this ball or this rock across the screen, right? And it allows children time to process, time to formulate perhaps a message, and then move on from there.
This is part 1 of a 2-part episode. Stay tuned next week for the second half of this episode. And as always, thank you guys so much for listening.